Picture this, it's July 1776, and a rising, palpable panic is absolutely gripping Philadelphia. I mean, America's largest city is terrified. A massive fleet from the British Empire is encroaching, literally poised to sail right up the Delaware River, strike the very heart of the Revolution, and crush it before it even really begins. In this historical explainer, we're going to dive into a story that plays out exactly like a dramatic thriller. It is a gripping tale of mud, blood, and the very first acre of land ever purchased by the United States government. So let's jump right into this and see how a brand new nation started buying up land before it even had a constitution that said it could. Look at the breathtaking speed of these events here. We all know about July 4th, right? Independence Day, the soaring ideals, those beautiful words about liberty. But the gritty, desperate reality was that just 9 days prior, on June 25th, Congress frantically authorized the purchase of land for defense. And then, on July 5th, literally a mere 24 hours after adopting that great declaration, a deed was actually secured for a muddy 96-acre farm. This wasn't some grand ceremonial act of statecraft. This was a frantic, feverish scramble for survival.
And so, what did that survival cost? 600 pounds in Pennsylvania currency. That money was hastily paid out to the Paul family for their riverfront property, a place known as Billingsport. Now, really think about the magnitude of this moment. This is the very first land purchase in United States history. They didn't have the Articles of Confederation yet. They certainly didn't have a constitution authorizing a federal government to go out and buy real estate. It was absolute improvisation, driven entirely by the terrifying prospect of British warships just obliterating their capital.
Okay, so the secret to this specific location was something called the Cheval de Frise. Imagine these giant, 30-ton wooden boxes, completely packed to the brim with heavy stones. They were sunk right to the bottom of the river, armed with these iron-tipped, splintering wooden spikes that were hidden just beneath the murky water, angled directly into the current. Basically, any enemy ship attempting to pass would have its hull violently ripped open by this underwater forest of wood and iron. The Billingsport land was purchased for one specific, critical reason: to build a fort that could stop the British from simply walking up the shore and dismantling that deadly underwater trap. Section 1, Illusions and Harsh Reality. The impossible build on the Delaware. To design this vital defense, a brilliant young Polish engineer named Thaddeus Kosciuszko arrives on the scene. But what actually unfolded was this striking, tragic contrast between grand expectations and grim reality. On one hand, Kosciuszko draws up this magnificent blueprint. You've got a massive 180-foot redoubt, 18 heavy cannons, deep defensive moats, and a sprawling abattis of sharpened logs. It was the design of a truly impenetrable fortress. But the reality? Well, it was incredibly depressing. Because of a severe lack of almost everything, the fort's dimensions had to be scaled down to basically a quarter of their original size. Materials were practically non-existent, and the troops that were meant to garrison the fort, they were constantly being redirected to other desperate fronts. It's the classic, dramatic irony of revolutionary logistics. And, the nightmare went way beyond just missing lumber. The agonizing construction phase itself started taking a bloody toll long before a single British soldier even arrived. The bitter, brutal winter of 1776 into 1777 just froze the muddy ground, and it froze the men trying to dig it. Master builder Robert Smith fell terribly ill in those freezing, unforgiving conditions and actually died. Later on, French Major General Philippe Ducoudray, who had aggressively pushed to expand the fort, tragically drowned at a nearby ferry crossing. Fort Billingsport was rapidly turning into this doomed, cursed endeavor. Complete despair settled into the camp, and the exhausted garrison suffered massive, devastating rates of desertion. As if the elements and the sheer bad luck weren't enough, there was a literal fatal design flaw. General Nathaniel Greene comes in, inspects this agonizing, half-built site, and delivers a truly terrifying verdict. The fort was, in his words, not prepared in the rear thereof to resist any force by small arms. The implications of that are horrifying. Every single cannon, every thick earthen wall, proudly faced the river, just waiting for the British fleet. But the back of the fort, the side facing the land, was completely exposed and practically defenseless. The tension here is immense, right? Because the enemy is rapidly closing in, and they are far too smart to just play right into the Americans' hands. Section 2, the climax, the dramatic evacuation. Then, in October 1777, the trap snaps shut. The British execute this absolutely brilliant flanking maneuver. They don't sail up the river into the iron spikes, no way.
Instead, they land miles downriver, bypass the water defenses entirely, and march overland, heading straight toward that vulnerable, totally exposed backside of the fort. And this is the terrifying reality the Americans are now looking at. 1,500 battle-hardened British and Scottish troops marching relentlessly toward a decimated garrison of barely 100 men, mostly just exhausted local militia and a handful of artillerymen. This wasn't going to be a battle. It was an absolute death sentence. Brigadier General Silas Newcomb, the commander of that local militia, actually rides out to scout the approaching enemy, and his realization upon seeing the British forces was chilling. He later wrote, "I thought it prudent to retreat, which we did in tolerable order, keeping a constant fire in our rear." Newcomb suddenly understood they weren't facing some minor scouting party. They were looking at a massive, highly disciplined army that was already sending out flanking units to completely encircle them. The fort was doomed. And this is exactly where absolute chaos erupts. There is literally no time left. First, they frantically scramble to transfer whatever men and ammunition they can across the river using these small boats. Second, to make sure the enemy gets absolutely nothing, the soldiers torch their own barracks in the cookhouse. Flames are just lighting up the entire shoreline. Third, they hastily spike their own cannons, literally jamming the touch holes so they can never be fired again. And finally, as the buildings are burning to the ground, the last remnants of the garrison flee blindly through the adjacent cornfield, running desperately under live British gunfire as the redcoats are quite literally breaching the perimeter. They escaped by the absolute skin of their teeth.
Section 3. The Legacy. A forgotten muddy hole. Following that completely chaotic retreat, the fort was lost, the British cleared the river traps, and the Delaware was officially opened. Today, if you go and visit the site of Billingsport, you are not going to find a majestic national park. It's just a forgotten, weed-choked patch of dirt wedged right between these massive oil refineries. But here is the enduring legacy of this tragic drama. This first acre of federal land wasn't some grand abstract symbol of liberty. It was a gritty, muddy, unfinished military fortification born out of sheer, unadulterated panic. Yet this desperate, failed project quietly created a massive constitutional precedent for all future government land acquisitions. Without this chaotic first step, there might never have been a land ordinance or the famous Louisiana Purchase. This muddy hole was essentially the chaotic birth of the nation's territorial sovereignty. Which brings us to a final thought to ponder today. Can the true foundation of a nation really be built merely on paper, constructed from just lofty declarations and manifestos? Or does it ultimately require the physical, muddy, blood-soaked ground beneath its feet to become real? The gritty reality of nation building is often tragic. It's messy and it's deeply chaotic. But honestly, that is exactly what makes history so incredibly compelling. Thanks for joining me in this explainer. Keep exploring because the past is always full of surprises.